Does that, anyway. So it's a divine activity, but that still doesn't define what kind of activity it is, right? I mean, we still have to know what does it mean, okay? And for that, if we want to understand the nature of a verb, subject can be important, but direct object is more important. So we find that the verb create takes on a number of different kinds of direct objects grammatically. Let me give you an example in English. We talk about the word create. We think we understand what create means. But then I talk about, I'm going to create a curriculum. Oh, okay. I'm going to create a masterpiece. Okay, see, the object is important. I'm going to create a committee. You know, I hope that's creation out of nothing, because I don't want to be on the committee. Okay? People create havoc, right? The direct object's important, because that helps you to understand what the verbal idea is about. It's just how language works. Okay, so when we look at the variety of objects, this is just a sampling. This is not all of them, but it's just a sampling. Interesting things. God creates Jerusalem. That's an idea, a concept. It doesn't mean that he built the city. He creates phenomena like wind and fire. And look at that one. Darkness. God created darkness. What's that mean even? God creates purity. Created me a pure heart, O God. That's bara. So you start to get an idea of the whole range of ideas that are packaged in this verb that reflect the different kinds of ways that it can be used. And so we start to understand that the verb create, we can't impose on that verb, bara, our own ideas about what it means to create. We have to try to start asking what they believed about it. Now, that was actually a turning point for me. I grew up in the Young Earth Camp, 6 days, 24 hours. It was not an aggressive thing in my household and in my church, but it was a default. It was a given. It wasn't really under discussion. And sometime in my career, I started, as I read more of the Hebrew text, tried to understand more of the ancient world, tried to penetrate the ancient literature, I felt like somehow I'm not asking the right question. Just like I said before, we have to ask their questions. And I got thinking that I can see where this view is coming from. We want to respect God's word. We want to read it literally, okay? But recognizing that literal might be a little bit different thing here. Now, I was actually standing in front of a class, an advanced Hebrew class that wasn't as big as this, an advanced Hebrew class, doing Genesis 1, and going through kind of the issues, like bara. And I said, look at this. On the first day, God calls the light day. Doesn't that strike you as weird? Why didn't God call the light light? What do you mean he called it day? Day is not the same thing as light, and light is not the same thing as day. What's going on here? Furthermore, neither day nor light are physical material things, which we often incorporate in our little package deal on create. That it's a material activity. And so we talk about creation out of nothing, material out of non-material. But yet here, on the first day of creation, God creates day, and he somehow does it with the connection of light. And those aren't material. And why in the world is he calling light day? And then I said what I'd never said in my head or in my heart or out loud in a class. I asked them, what kind of creation account is this anyway? right in the middle of a lecture, all the pieces fell into place. And I had a way of thinking that took me past kind of the questions we ask, to help me start thinking about what kind of questions were they asking. My life changed in that moment. And I've been on the road for 25 years talking about exactly that question. How do we think about what kind of creation account is this? What do you think? Yeah. So let's try to probe that a little bit. Some of you are maybe thinking, well, what options are there? Great, I'm glad you're thinking that, because I'm going to help you see some alternatives. So, imagine that there was a play that was coming into the theaters in Johannesburg. And you were really excited about seeing it, but wow, the tickets were really expensive and you couldn't afford it. Some of your students, you know what I'm talking about. And you know, trying to get to Johannesburg and see the play, but you really wanted to, and then someone gives you free tickets. You say, oh, great, thank God, I'm going to go, I'm going to see this play. And so the day comes and you head on down into the city. And it pours rain. And there are ruts in the road, and there are potholes in the road, and there's detours, and there's closed roads, and traffic is a mess, and some of you had that experience getting here today, and you finally get downtown, and you get a little bit lost in this city because your Wi-Fi went out, and then you can't find a parking space, and you end up parking, a mile away, and then you tread through the rain and finally walk into the theater dripping wet and late. And you slip into your seat. Of course, you have to squeeze by 5 people to get there, knocking over coffee and popcorn on the way. And you squeeze into the seat. Whew, I'm here. And the lights come up for intermission. So you turn to the people around you and you say, how did the play begin? Well, you've got lots of people, helpful people sitting around you. And one of them speaks up right away and said, oh, the play began in 1932. The script was written in 1932. It was a very popular script in the day. It was actually a Pulitzer Prize candidate. And so the play began in the writing of this very important script. You say, well, that's fascinating. I mean, really, thank you, but that's not what I was asking. Another person chimes in and says, no, that's not. So I have to push my buttons here, okay? Another person chimes in and said, no, that's not it. This theater was created just for this kind of play. It's set up for it. It's a black box theater and really established in order. So the play began when it became located in this location. You say, well, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that one, but thank you very much. That's great. Another person comes in and says, it's the set that matters. This set was made for this play particularly, and it was designed in order to bring out the powerful message of this play. You're saying, okay, we're all missing the point here. You're not giving me the information that I want. Someone else pops in and says, it's really about the cast. The cast is what makes the play what it is. And when the cast began, that's when the cast was chosen. They say, no. Say, thank you all very much. But please help me know what's happened since the curtain opened. That's all I need to know. How did the play begin? What I really like about this illustration is that from some perspective, they're all right answers. It's not like somebody was lying or telling you something that was untrue or missing the point. They all could be defensively some way to describe the play beginning. Which means that there are multiple ways to describe such a beginning that are not contradictory, but reflect different perspectives. You know where I'm going, right? Because we ask the question, how did the world begin? in the way that the modern conversation has treated it, it's very much a theater story, stage, or maybe even set story. Because we think scientifically, materially. That's how we answer the question. Okay, but is that the only way to answer the question? Other cultures might have very different ways of answering how the world began. And I'm not talking about mythology or riding on a turtle's back or something like that. I'm talking about just a different perspective that is not contradictory, but offers a different angle, a different vantage point, answering different questions. If they are answering different questions, then we are not being accountable to them when we push our question on them. And that's what we have to be careful about. So, when we open up Genesis 1, you knew we'd get to it, right? We open up Genesis 1, and we read, in the beginning God created heavens and earth. Well, that's what you read in your English Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz would be what you read in your Hebrew Bible. Okay? So what is that saying? Well, it talks about a beginning. So how did the world begin? Is that how history began, how time began, how the story began, how people began, how God's relationship with people began, how the cosmos began? What is it? One of the common views of reading that verse these days, and it's one that I agree with, is that verse 1 is meant to be an introduction to Genesis 1, to the 7-day account. It's meant to be a literary introduction. Those of you who have studied Genesis know that Genesis is structured by literary introductions. These are the generations of, or these are the accounts of, the formulas that frame Genesis. And so one of the ways to interpret this first statement is as one of those literary introductions. If that is so, and again, that's just one option out there, it just happens to be one that I agree with, I think there's good reason for it. If that's so, then nothing happened in verse 1. If it's a literary introduction, it's just saying this is the story we're going to tell. The beginning that it's talking about is not before the 7 days. The beginning is the 7 days. And that's validated when you get to the end of day 7 and it says, so in 7 days God created the heavens and the earth. That's what verse 1 told you to expect. God creating the heavens and the earth. And so the 7 days is that beginning. And the bara that is mentioned in verse 1 is the bara of those 7 days. So nothing happens in verse 1. The importance of that is that the beginning of the story is in verse 2. Verse 1 is just like the chapter title. This is what I'm going to talk about. Verse 2 is the beginning of the story. And when you get to verse 2, you find out that there are some givens. There are things already in place. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, that's my title. So here's the start. Now the earth was, you say, wait, what do you mean earth? Where'd that come from? The earth was formless and void. We're going to talk about that. And darkness was on the surface of the deep. Hold it! Question, what's the deep? Where'd that come from? You see then that there are certain pieces already on the board. Certain things that are already in place. That it hasn't told you about making them. They're just there, already as part of this set. So that means that as we look at the text, the starting point, where do you begin? Just like, do we begin with the script? Do we begin with the theater, the set, the cast? Where do we begin? When this account begins, there are already pieces in play, and the starting point is not lacking matter. Earth and the deep are there. The starting point is lacking order. And that's what these terms, formless and empty, convey in their Hebrew usage. Same process, you look at all the places where they occur, look at the common ground, understand meaning. Okay? Now this fits into an ancient world thinking, because in the ancient world, darkness and sea are elements of non-order in the ancient world. All the way through Egypt, Babylon, they talk about order and non-order. Non-order is not an evil thing. It just hasn't been ordered yet. The example I use is, when you move into a new place. Okay, the movers have come and gone, which is usually your friends. Okay, and come and gone, and there you sit among boxes and boxes and boxes and furniture all in a jumble in the corner. That's lacking order. It's not evil. It's just not ordered yet. Things have to go in the cabinets and the cupboards and in the rooms they belong. Okay, now, if once you have your apartment and you're all set up, and somebody comes in and ransacks it, that's different. Okay, that's disruptive. So, darkness and sea are elements of non-order in the ancient world. And no surprise that Israel sees things through that same lens. They're thinking about order. One example is that there's an Egyptian parallel where it talks about the non-existent. Do you know that different cultures think about existence differently? That scraps everything. Different cultures think about existence differently. The Egyptians have this term non-existent as a reference to that which has not yet been ordered. If it's not ordered, it doesn't exist. The Egyptians talk about the sea as non-existent. Doesn't fit our definitions, does it? They talk about the desert as non-existent because those are places where there is not order. Now, they're not talking about ecological order. They're talking about human order. This is all how the ancient mind works. What's important to them. So we've got this idea, and that's exactly the concept of formless and void in Genesis 1:2, formless and empty. It's communicating non-order. So when things begin, they are non-ordered. And so you have the sea, it's non-order. You have darkness, it's non-order. You have earth, which is unformed, it's not been ordered. Unformed doesn't mean physical materiality shaping, like mountain terraforming. Okay, it's not terraforming. It's rather order forming. By the way, lots of the creation accounts we find in the ancient world mix together indiscriminately the cosmos and society. The same concept of creation running through all of them. And intermixed. Order. Order in the cosmos, order in society. So, our Hebrew word is tohu. That's the one they translate formless. It's a little different from tofu, but not much. So, tohu. And again, we can look at the examples. We've got 20 occurrences, more than half of them in Isaiah. It often describes a wilderness or a wasteland, just like we have in Egypt, those kinds of ideas. There are some passages that do it. It also sees tohu as the result of destruction. Destruction makes it non-ordered. It's a ruinous landscape. Okay, it's used to talk about things that have no purpose or meaning. Idols and those who make them. It's the common denominator in all of these is that things that are of no purpose or worth, lacking order and function. That's the way, if we're on target here, that's the way that the beginning point is described in Genesis. It's non-ordered. Now at this point, you're ready for me to introduce to you the tripartite order spectrum. Doesn't that sound fancy? Okay, you'll catch it. Okay, the tripartite order spectrum. Yeah, there it is. Okay, you've already been introduced to some of the key concepts. The first in the three parts is non-order. That's the default. Okay, by the way, I'm not talking about the laws of thermodynamics here. Okay, this is the ancient way of thinking, that the default is going to be non-order. That things will become non-ordered. They will move that way. Order has to be sustained. It's an undesirable state, but it's not evil. Okay? We know about non-order being invasive because we recognize how often we have to do the dishes and the laundry and clean up the house and things like that. Non-order is invasive, and order must be sustained. Okay? So that's a category non-order. Again, it's not evil, but it's not desirable. You don't want to live out of boxes in your apartment all your life. You want to unpack things and put them where they belong. Okay? Then creation, bara, means establishing order. And I'm suggesting to you that that's what an Israelite would have understood when they talked about creating, bara. To them, creating, that is, bringing something into existence, right? See how existence comes into this. To bring something into existence means to bring it into an ordered system. Not, like we think, to give it a material shape. For them, bara is something related to order, not related to material. That's the kicker. Remember, we're trying to unpack what they have packaged in this idea of creation. We're trying to ask their questions, not ours. We're trying to track with the author, not impose our ways of thinking on them. So the idea that when they think about creation, they're thinking about establishing order. That is a creative act. Yeah.
Can you show that from another part of the Old Testament outside of Genesis 1?
I think it's all through the Old Testament.
Could you just throw one example out?
About the importance of order?
No. Bara being used not to create out of nothing, but to create order out of non-order.
I'd have to go through all the 50 occurrences again. I don't have one on the top of my head. So in my book, The Lost World of Genesis 1, I've got all 50 occurrences listed. I go through them all. It's a good question. Sorry, I don't have one to pluck out. Now, in the ancient world, order is established by the gods, no different than Israel. Okay, it's just gods instead of God. Or by humans delegated to that task by the gods. So humans are order bringers, delegated so by God. Order cannot be sustained independently of active agency. Okay, again, you have to work at it. Okay, so order is the ideal. Order is the desirable. Non-order is the default and what things will move toward. Okay, so that's two parts of the order spectrum. The third part, tripartite, the third part is disorder. So non-order, order, and disorder. Disorder is disruptive. That's the person who ransacks your apartment. Okay? It assumes order exists. You can't disrupt an order that doesn't exist. Okay? And so in that sense, it assumes an order situation. Non-order is contrary to an order situation, right? It's the opposite end of the coin. So non-order and disorder are different. Disorder is evil, not, or can be. Okay? It takes various forms. Let me explain that. In Israel, as you understand within the Torah, okay, they needed to present offerings for their sin. Okay, so there was evil, sin that was done, and a sin offering is needed. But they also had to give a sin offering a woman who had her monthly period. Same offering. That impurity is disorder. But it's not sinful. It's not evil. It's just something that needs to be remedied to restore order. And the sacrificial system reestablished order in light of things that disrupted it. Okay? So disorder includes evil, but it's not limited to evil. The tripartite spectrum, from all that I can tell, from all of my research, from all the support that I can find, this is the way people thought in the ancient world. They thought in these three categories. And I can defend it in Mesopotamian and Egyptian literature. I can defend it in Israelite literature. This would be the highest value as they saw it. And creation establishes that because God is a God of order. God is the creator and he has brought order. And that's what they praise him for. Now that's in contrast to, we often think in a bipartite model. That is good and evil. Bipartite is our default, even though we recognize it's problematic. Is an earthquake good or evil? Well, from the impact it has on people, it's evil. But it's not moral. The shifting plates have no morality behind them. And likewise, from a geologist standpoint, an earthquake is necessary. It's good because it takes care of the shifting tectonic plates, and it's important. Okay, so human impact could have a different answer than scientific underlying ideas. So order for whom? Okay, but if you're only talking about good and evil, you end up with a lot of questions. This tripartite helps sort things out a little bit. So you might say an earthquake is non-order. Well, you might give a scientific explanation that says it's order. Okay, but again, order for whom is an important question. So this is just in contrast to how we often have our default thinking. So one of the significances of this is that the beginning state is not perfection. It begins with non-order. It doesn't begin with perfection. But then God brings order, and it's good. Good is a word, tov is the Hebrew word, and that's a word in the order spectrum. When God says it's good, he's not saying it's morally perfect. He's not saying that it's perfect in design. It's not the word perfect. It's the word good. And good means it's ordered because that's the desirable situation. So this is operating within the order spectrum. So what I'm talking about here is a functional focus rather than a material focus. In the ancient functional focus, existence is defined by having a function, meaning a role and a purpose in an ordered system. When I first wrote about all of this, I used the word function and contrast function and material. And I think that's okay, but the contrast between order and material is better. So I've drifted more toward that. But even here, I used order to define it. That is, within an ordered system. So God creating order as opposed to God creating matter. Now, don't get confused. Certainly God created matter. That's not the question. Just like when I asked, how did the play begin? Yes, there was a script and somebody wrote it. But when you were sitting there at the theater, you weren't asking the question about the script. Okay? So yes, God created matter, and an Israelite would have understood that if you could get them to think about matter. Not a concept that they would have easily had. Okay, so God created everything at every level. The question we're dealing with is, what part of the story does Israel want to tell? What kind of creation account is this? And I'm suggesting that there's evidence, linguistic, literary, cultural, that suggests that Israel is more interested in the origins of order rather than in the origins of matter. Now, that's a little harder for us to grasp because in our scientific world, science is all about matter. It's all about the material cosmos around us. So we naturally think in those terms. Example of a place where you think about order more than material. If I talk to you about your electronic device, your phone, your iPad, your laptop, whatever it is, okay, and I ask you, talk to me about your iPad, let's say that. Talk to me about your iPad. It's unlikely that you would talk to me about the chips on the motherboard. It's more likely that you would talk to me about the apps and the operating system that you have. You would talk about apps, not chips. Chips is the material stuff. Apps is how all of that's ordered. It has to do with how you use it. And for most of you, unless you're a computer technician, the apps are more important because they affect your use. Okay? So even we can understand that you might prioritize one or the other. That doesn't mean there aren't chips. And it doesn't mean that you don't think there are chips. Of course you know there are chips. You don't care. Just so it does what I want it to do. Now you've got it. Order in the ancient world. Just so it works the way I want it to work. Who set it up to work the way that I want it to work? The software engineer, not the hardware engineer, although the hardware engineer stuff has to be there. Maybe that helps. Okay? So I'm not saying that they wouldn't have believed that God created the material cosmos. It's not the question on their mind. So good, functioning properly in an ordered system, I covered that already. So I'm suggesting, again, this is just for your consideration. I don't need to walk out of here with clones, okay? It's just for you to think about. That maybe there's a different perspective on creation that they're giving. Provides an account of functional origins, the origin of order, not material origins. So Genesis 1 is about God bringing order into the midst of non-order. That's the question people would have had in the ancient world. That's what they want to know. That's how they want to understand things. That's how they appreciated what God was doing. God is the one who ordered this world. And we think about that sometimes too, even in philosophical apologetics context where we'll talk about the anthropic principle. I mean, we're getting at the same issues, that this world works perfectly for us, for human life. But for them, that was not just an apologetics conversation. That was how they thought about creation. Now, so if we think about this perspective and ask the question, so the Bible is written for us but not to us, and the for us part is built into the message of the text, the claims of the text. So what are the claims that such a text is making? Thinking about it perhaps being about order instead of about material. Maybe it's not making material claims, but making order claims. So I would suggest what Genesis 1 is claiming, is teaching its message, that there is role and purpose in an ordered system. And God is the one who did that. Creation declares God is the one who has ordered the spheres, the grand dance of the stars, the working of everything in our world. God is the one, both cosmic and social. It's an account that is neither scientific, it's not dealing with our scientific ways of asking questions, our scientific interests, and not chronological. That is, we don't have to ask the question, how can there be light on day 1 when there's not sun, moon, and stars until day 4? We don't have to worry about that. This is not material, first of all. It's not chronological, second of all. It's talking about order issues in a priority way. Time is first. Day and night, the most principal feature in order. Day 2, space. I don't mean outer space. I mean place to live. Between the waters, God created a space for us to live. the rotation, how plants work. They grow, they drop seed, they grow again. Food. That's how our world is ordered, to give us time, to give us place, to give us sustenance. Then when we get to days 4 through 6, it's talking about the various functionaries, the occupants. And so God made the great lights. Interpreters have noticed for a long time that the great lights are not named sun and moon. It's the greater light and the lesser light. And some people have said, well, that's because the name sun and moon are also the names of pagan deities. And so the biblical text didn't want to use them. Well, the Bible uses them all the time. So that can't be really a serious matter. I think there's a totally different reason. And that is, when we hear the phrase, the Lord God made the great lights, we think about God forming material objects. Here's the catch. Nobody in the ancient world, including the Israelites, knew that the sun, moon, and stars were material objects. How would they? The Babylonians thought they were gods, not material objects. By calling them lights, the Israelites are making it clear that they don't consider them gods. But that doesn't mean they consider them material objects. They're lights. It's what they do. And they reign over the night and day as lights that God has ordained. So an Israelite reading this would not say, oh, that's saying that God made those material objects. They would say, God made those lights to work, to do their job. He ordered them in the system in which they operate. We often talk about Genesis 1 as an origins text. I want to push back. Origins, not always, but it can be kind of a scientific term, because we talk about material origins, scientific origins, the origins of the cosmos in a material sense. So the term itself, origins, can carry a scientific implication and perspective. And I'm not sure that's a fair thing to assume. So I prefer to call it a text of cosmic identity. This is what the cosmos is. It's ordered for people. The word make, that we encounter numerous times in Genesis 1, as a Hebrew word does not designate, it indicates agency, but it doesn't designate the level of agency. So it's a verb that can be translated either make or do. Those are both agency terms. You're making something, you're doing something. Okay? It can also, it's translated dozens of other ways in your English Bibles. Provide, perform, all kinds of different translations. Okay? So it always designates agency, whether in action in some way, making something, doing something, providing something. It's always a word of agency, but it doesn't designate the level. In other words, when you say that someone made something, that doesn't give them direct control of it, but at least ultimate control of it, although anything in between. It doesn't designate the nature of the agency. So again, that kind of gives us a lot to think about. So I suggest another way we can think about this distinction is the difference between making a house and making a home. Okay? So let's think through this one. Building a house, it's a creative act, a material creative act. Architecture, space usage, electricity, plumbing, HVAC, foundations, roof. Okay? And so in our modern cultural river, we tend to think about creation as a house story. God building the cosmos. Materially. It's just our default. Okay, so for us, often when we read it as a house story. In a house story, science provides the plot. So it's no wonder that we try to think about science when we read Genesis 1. Okay, and of course a house is what you live in. It's a structure, it's material. But what about a home? Making a home is also a creative process. So in the ancient cultural river, creation, I'm suggesting, is a home story. Ordering the home rather than building the house. They're both creation. What kind of creation story is this? Is it a house story? Is it a home story? Now, you may end up concluding that it's a house story. I don't have an argument with you, but have you considered whether it might be a home story? Again, I'm trying to put another option on the table for you to consider. You've got to weigh the evidence and decide what you think. But what I'm suggesting is that there may be some advantages. There may be some things that better represent the ancient world by thinking of it as a home story. In a home story, theology provides the plot. Okay? This distinction was first suggested to me by a friend. I had given a presentation much like this one without these slides. And I got back to my seat and he said to me, he said, in my experience, when a family goes looking for a new place to live, maybe the dad will go looking around at the foundation and the electrical system and the roof and things like that. He's interested in the house. But maybe the mom is looking about which room are we going to use in which way and where are we going to put the furniture. And the kids are running around saying, which room's mine, which room's mine, and thinking about how they're going to arrange it. So you've got the dad in that illustration talking about the house story. And you've got the mom and the kids thinking about the home story. Okay? Different ways to approach it. So here theology provides a plot because this is ordering, God ordering it. Now you could say God's the builder. Great, I don't disagree and Israelites wouldn't either. But is that the story they want to tell? When we have students over the house and they might ask about our place, they don't want me to talk to them about the electricity. Really, I know they don't. They don't care about my HVAC system. Okay, they want to know about how we've made this place our home. What story do they want to tell? And for most of us, I suspect we've never asked the question. But we have to. And even if you come back around to the same position you have now, don't ignore the question. Don't ignore the need to consider there might be other alternatives. So, a house is a place you live in. Home is where your story comes to life. Okay, full transparency, I got that from a real estate commercial. But I like it, it works. No footnote. But here's the question. Which is the most important story? You could say, well, they're both important. Of course they are. But which is the story you want to tell? More importantly, not which is the story you want to tell. What's the story they're telling? And it may be different than the one that we would want to tell. This does not in any way diminish God as creator. In every way, at every level. It's not a theology question. What did God create? It's a literary question. What story is this creation narrative telling us? That makes it a different question. Of course, God created people in his image. The image of God is an interesting concept that can be explored from various directions in the ancient Near East. one of the most important things to recognize is that we should see that it is corporate, not individual. That is, all humanity, corporately, is the image of God. Not each one of us individually is the image of God. That's not how it's treated. Image of God is a corporate designation. Humanity is given the image of God in all its male and female varieties. Now, as you're trying to process that, this will help. Would you stand up in your church and say, I am the body of Christ? I hope not. Right? Because none of us individually are the body of Christ. The church corporately is the body of Christ. We each contribute to that. We each participate in that, but I am not the body of Christ. And I would say the concept is the same here. I am not the image of God. We all, humanity, are the image of God. Humanity is, not humanity, not humans are. Humanity is the image of God. What does that mean? That means that he has delegated us to function alongside of him. That's how the text describes it. Okay? That we're going to rule, that we're going to serve him. He is the order bringer. We are going to bring order along with him as his co-workers. Subdue and rule. So he designates humanity as having that task. And we don't serve alongside of him by being material creators. We serve alongside him by being order bringers. Image bearer is an order bringer. It's not someone who's a mirror image physically. It's not someone who is a mental image in terms of psychological capacity. It's someone who is a function image, working alongside him. That's how the text describes it. So we are his image. In that sense, we function alongside of him. That's how it's supposed to be, doing his work, his way, his order, not ours. This is our identity. It's a relationship term, and it's our identity with him. We stand as a substitute for him, doing his work in this world. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We are his representatives as we do his work. And we find out, very specifically, it's gender inclusive. Okay, now we've got to get to another important point here. I'm going too slow, but let's get to this next point. Day 7. Day 7 confuses us, doesn't it? God rested. Really? What in the world are we talking about here? Why would God need to rest? What does God resting have to do with creation? This is confusing. If it's confusing, you should assume that you're not thinking straight about it. There's something that you're missing. And in this case, that's very much what's going on. When people think about God resting in the ancient world, what idea comes to mind? You say, oh, I don't know. But we should, shouldn't we? Where do gods rest in the ancient world? I don't mean what situations, like when it's bedtime. I mean where? Temple. Gods rest in temples. In fact, temples are built for gods to rest in. So, in the ancient world, gods rest in temples, and that's the temple's role. Now we have to ask, what's the temple? See, if God's resting, and that implies to anybody in the ancient world temple, then what's going on? Well, we find out that the temple is the command center of the cosmos, where God sustains order. That's what he does in the temple. Now, some of these ideas are actually in the Old Testament that you could find. Take, for instance, this one. Let us go to his dwelling place. That's the temple. Come to your resting place. That's the temple. Same as his dwelling place. Okay, the ark, and you've desired it for a dwelling. This is my resting place. That's the temple. For and ever, ever and ever, here I will sit enthroned. Ah! God doesn't rest in a bed. God rests on a throne. And he's enthroned in the temple. And he takes his place on the throne and can rest there because order has been established. Everything is set up the way it's supposed to be. And God is in control. There's something deeply theological here about the seventh day, which we usually say, oh, that was some Jewish holiday, let's move on. People may be the climax of the 6 days. Rest is the climax of the creation account. Don't talk about the 6 days of creation. If you cut off day 7, you've missed the whole point. Day 7 is where God sits on his throne. And that's what all of the ordering was for God then to take up his rule. Rest is the main goal of creation. Because rest is a word in the order spectrum. Resting expresses having control over an ordered system. And that kind of rest then does not reflect disengagement, but engagement. God doesn't disengage when he rests. He rather takes his seat on the throne. In America, we have a day coming in just a couple days where someone is going to sit in that chair behind the Oval Office. And there are plenty of people who like that, and there are plenty of people who don't. But that's going to represent engagement, not disengagement. He's going to engage in the rule of the country for good or ill, not disengagement. The president is going to rest, not in the Lincoln bedroom, but in the Oval Office. The rest God gives resolves unrest. So rest is not the opposite of activity. Rest is the opposite of unrest. This is a great example of where cultural information makes a big difference. And we know this because hopefully you can see the power of this theology. Yet, so many people just gloss over day 7, not knowing what to do with it. And I'm trying to say, in an Israelite viewpoint, it makes all the sense in the world, but mostly when you understand that the creation story they're telling is an order story, not a material story. So that brings us quickly, I have to be quick here, to the 7 days. So too often the controversy has settled on, okay, is this 24-hour day? Is it, an extended day? Things of that sort. And that whole discussion then concerns the age of the earth. We have all these controversies about the age of the earth, young earth, old earth, all of these things. Do you see that question, the age of the earth, is a material question? Age of something material. How long something material has existed. Age of the earth is a material question. If I'm anywhere close to on target, and the Genesis 1 text is a text about order and identity rather than origins and science and material, then it's simply the wrong question. It's just not the question that an Israelite would be answering, and not a question that the Israelites would be asking. So if we try to derive answers about that from this text, we are imposing something foreign on the text by forcing it into a discussion that it is not having, forcing it into a perspective that it does not want, or can't want or not want, it's not aware of it. This is more about temple building and temple operation rather than terraforming. About God's rest on a throne, bringing order to the cosmos. Not about whether he made mountains and springs and rivers and lakes. If the 7 days is like a temple inauguration, then objects are not necessarily being made in those 7 days. Again, it's an account about ordering, I've suggested, rather than about material origins. If the 7 days are not about material, but about ordering, then it can't answer questions about the material cosmos, because it's just not asking those questions. Temple inaugurations in the ancient world were 7 days. For 7 days, once the structure was built, physical, material, there it is, 7 days. No, I'm sorry, 7 years Solomon built his, right? But then the structure's all built, but it's not a temple yet. It's not a temple till God's in it, sitting on his throne. And that inauguration, moving it from material structure to ordered temple, is a 7-day ceremony, both in Israel and in the ancient world. So what significance is the 7 days? I would suggest it's not a material significance for the age of the earth, but rather an order significance for God on his throne in a temple ruling the world. That idea is not new theology to any of you. To think about God on his throne ruling the world, that's not earth-shattering here. You would believe that theology anyway. But the question is, what do we demand from the biblical text? I'm saying if we're going to be faithful interpreters, accountable to the authors, tracking with the author, then we need to read it with their ideas in mind, their words, what the words meant, and how they understood these ideas. Now, some people have disagreed with the way I read the ancient world here. Fine. It doesn't hurt me if you disagree with me. It would be more hurtful if you ignored any possibility of a different way of thinking. And I find that a damaging thing when I catch myself doing it. And I would suggest to you that it's always a good thing to be ready to consider a different understanding. If the days are concerned with bringing order rather than making things, the 7 days has nothing to do with the age of the earth. In that case, it doesn't matter whether you argue for 24-hour days or not. If material things aren't going on in those 7 days, it has nothing to do with the age of the earth, and that whole discussion evaporates. Last slide. I'm suggesting my position for you to consider. The text uses temple imagery of 7-day inauguration to establish that God ordered the cosmos by assigning roles and functions with purpose. Praise to God. Amen. Okay, Philip, how do you want to go from here?